future.figucarolina.org, English translation. 645th Contact Wednesday, the 17th of February 2016, 21:47 hours.
Here I am, Ptah, dear friend, and faster than I thought. But as always, be welcome and greeted.
Also my greetings to you, Edward. My friend and I told you on my last visit that I would soon come back again, because last Sunday we had to abruptly break off our conversation when your sister and brother-in-law came to visit us. Unfortunately, this meant that I could no longer discuss an important matter with you, as it would have been necessary to inform you. So today I am coming here specifically to talk about it, so I will come right away. These are private things that do not belong to the public, and that applies to...
Aha, but I think that this will be the downfall for such human beings, because...
This will be so, for the given ignorance and cross-headedness, as well as the entire mental sluggishness, but also the degenerated and sometimes delusional attitude, cloud the sense of reality, create false memories and lead to unconscious lies and slander as well as to false behaviors, as in circumstances, also to violence, and do not allow insight, understanding, or reason to come to the fore.
I know that, as well as an underlying psychopathy. Such human beings may be extremely pitiful, but they believe they are smarter than those who have a conscious and clear overview. But if we talk about it now, and what has been said should not be official but private for good reasons, the names of the persons concerned should therefore not be mentioned for various reasons. Nevertheless, I find that what you and I have just said can still be performed when I call up the conversation report. This is precisely because it clarifies a number of things that relate to the people we are talking about. With such human beings, I have often experienced this in my life. There are no valuable arguments that would be accepted by them, because they only see and acknowledge themselves and their personal allure and thus completely live ahead of reality and its truth alien to life.
That can certainly be a good thing if...
What you want to say, I mean no, and...
What you are saying is right, so I can agree with you. But such people in their morbid simple-mindedness are stupid and intellectually and rationally incapable of grasping reality and truth, because they are also incapable of changing themselves for the better and of giving their intellect and reason a possibility of development.
Simple and stupid, yes, that applies to such people. What I see as truth and not as insult when that is said. But will we stop if you have nothing more to say?
What I said was enough.
Then I have some questions, if you have enough time.
There is no rush.
All right, here's the deal. In the ancient prophecies, the symbol wolf is used for Russia, whereas in modern times, the bear is used as a symbol of Russia. I do not know why this is so and which causes are given for the two symbols. Maybe if you knew something about it?
I do, because of course I am familiar with world history in many respects. What I have to explain with regard to your question, why in the old prophecies Russia is not called bear as is usual today, but wolf, has unfortunately long since been forgotten, and has also not been handed down. Followed later on by the bear as a symbol and national personification for Russia, and was often used in Western Europe, especially in Great Britain during the Cold War. The origin of the symbol can be traced back to Western travelers, especially to a man named Sigismund von Herberstein, who served at the Russian court as Austrian imperial counselor and envoy and coined the symbol of the Russian bear in 1549, although the symbol bear has nothing to do with a bear, but is related to the geographical size of Russia. Since the 20th century, the bear symbol has also been used by the Russians themselves for their country. But what has to be said with regard to the old prophetic wolf symbol, which was already early coined for Russia, is the following. It is typical for the wolf note Billy = Canis lupus that it has a herd behavior and also a strict hierarchy, as was also the case in old times with the tribes in the expanses of the steppe empire of today's Russia. The wolf is an extremely shy animal, sociable and lives in packs, And in this connection, in old times, the tribes of the large country were compared to wolves by the manner of the Khazars, because these, like the wolves, lived in tribal communities and as such behaved in their community behavior similar to the wolves. So these tribes were also characterized by the fact that as a rule, they never broke into the territory of another tribe unless they were provoked to do so by any circumstances. They also stayed among themselves, and actually only very rarely allowed foreign tribesmen into their tribes. Consequently, they hardly mixed with other tribes, as is also the case with the wolves. These were typical behavioral characteristics of the old tribes, so that exceptions could only be made in extremely rare cases for each tribe according to certain rules, if an urgent and logically justifiable situation permitted this. The people of these old tribes who populated the present Russian state were reserved towards other peoples and tribes and thus avoided open contact with other peoples to a certain extent. A fact that has been preserved in the following tribes and then up to the present Russian people, who are tolerant and reserved towards other peoples and states even to the present day. Also the typical action of honoring, appreciating, and, if necessary, defending one's own country without demonstrating one's own offensive aggressiveness, but of delimiting and securing one's own country has remained as it was in former times. Equally, they took an example with the wolves on that occasion, who act in similar manner and mark and defend its precinct, as they are considered also on the cohesion of the own herd on that occasion, however. As wolves are not belligerent, so is not the Russian people today, and verbal and active defense serves only the purpose of their own people's conservation, the people's cohesion and the protection of their own country, and active advocacy for other peoples when they are in need and have problems of all kinds and seek help serves the friendship and help of neighbors. As far as the bear is concerned, it should be said that he is not aggressive. Like the wolf is not, but when he smells danger, he goes on to attack, as can also be the case with the wolf, which, however, is more likely to be deterred by danger. In addition, the bear is, unlike the wolf, not sociable but a loner, which the Russians are not because they are sociable people. Consequently, the bear symbol for Russia is completely wrongly chosen, which is why old Khazaran wise men chose the sociable wolf as a symbol for the people and the early country, which of course at that time was not yet called Russia, although this knowledge of this fact was lost early on, as I already explained.
As I know from history, Russia developed from the former East Slavic Empire, whereby a Grand Duchy of Moscow played a role as a partial duchy of the former East Slavic Empire, Kievan Rus, which, like Yugoslavia in the 20th century, was a multi-ethnic state with more than 100 ethnicities or tribes or even ethnic groups. And if I remember world history correctly, then in older German usage, Kiever Rus means Kiewer Russia, because Rus stood for Russia. The whole thing was a medieval empire with a center in Kiev, which was the forerunner of today's Russia, Ukraine, and Belarus. And with regard to the Khazars of Turkic origin, who dominated the steppes north of the Caspian and Black Seas from about 600 AD to the 10th century. A large part of the tribes is said to have converted to Judaism and founded the so-called Jewish Atlantis, which was also called the Forgotten Great Empire of the Jews and the 13th tribe.
That is true. But the real role of Judaism in this context must not be overestimated, for some of the traditions are greatly exaggerated and also falsified. Even though it must be said that in the Middle Ages the existence of a powerful Jewish state in those areas with a Jewish ruler was a unique and fascinating phenomenon.
I agree. Then the next question. Some time ago, about 3 years ago, I asked you if you could find out who we Earthlings are better drivers, women or men. You promised that you would assign the task of such a study to someone else.
This is what I did. Therefore, such a study took place, which was finished at the end of 2015, and as a result showed that women are worse drivers than men, but because they have much less driving experience than men. Nevertheless, they cause fewer accidents and are less serious than men. Only women who are as aggressive drivers as the majority of men are cause many and often serious accidents, similar to those caused by men.
And what about you, Playarin, with traffic accidents? You don't ride on roads with bike vehicles, you glide through the air with hovering vehicles.
Our planetary airways are designed and secured in such a way that accidents caused by collisions, etc. are impossible, and consequently human lives are neither harmed nor lamented, nor is there any material damage to the hovering aircraft.
Clear answer, thank you. Then I would like to talk about what your father Svath explained to me in the 1940s in terms of time, present, past, and future, and what you recently privately said about that. You will look into the estate of Svath and what came up in the conversation between him and me at that time. Unfortunately, I'm not familiar with everything anymore, so I would be grateful if you could find the records.
To find this was never a problem and is not a problem today, because all conversations between my father Svath and you were recorded, as well as the conversations between Asket and you, and of course all conversations since 1975 from the beginning, when my daughter Simyase had been in contact with you. So if you are sometimes interested in any conversations or parts of conversations from the time with my father and with Asket, then you can ask me about it and also get details, etc. of the conversations with them. I've told you that before. But since your question to me, I have searched in the annals and found the following record, which I will read to you and which my father explained to you on Sunday afternoon. The 2nd of February, 1947, in terms of time, present, past, and future. Time is not the same everywhere, because it depends on gravity and speed. In the case of a sun or a planet, time fluctuates depending on its size and distance from the center of gravity. This means that the further time is measured from the gravitational center, the faster it becomes as it slows down, but the closer it is to the gravitational center. With moons, planets, and suns, etc., this concerns per year, however, only millionth seconds. This means that near the gravitational center of a sun or planet, etc., the time flow is slowest, while it becomes faster on the sun or planet surface, etc., as well as on mountains and in space. In this respect, this is dependent on the size and mass of a body and thus on its gravitation. So the more massive a celestial body is, the slower the time is. Consequently, it loses itself in extremely low values and even in the standstill of time with a dark, giant structure or with a massive object, which tears suns, planets, other world space objects, gases, and all kinds of matter into itself by its force of attraction and thereby becomes more and more powerful and massive and finally completely cancels the flow of time. The enormous masses of such dark giant formations, which even tear entire galaxies into themselves and into which they cannot penetrate, but which can radiate externally through torn suns and galaxies, etc., as bright spherical formations, exhibit such an enormous attraction which is so extremely strong that no matter and no light signal can penetrate from this space area to the outside, and also no time can exist. Time exists only there, where solid space structures like evenly suns, planets, and other structures are, as these are given evenly in galaxies or outside these as world space wanderers. So time only exists where there are gravitational forces. Where, however, no gravity exists, there is also no time, but only endless duration and thus timelessness. The world space is also traversed by dark and mighty world space wanderers with great gravitational force, through which time streams are created, so that those who travel the world space can get into such time streams, although we are protected against their effects. This is because our spacecrafts have their own gravitations and are therefore protected against external time influences, as well as against matter and radiation. And we are also protected by our gravitational technique against the effects of speed, so that time does not slow down for us in the spacecraft when we move through space at very high speed. And in order to compensate for the flow of time outside the spacecraft, which is caused by high speeds, we have a special technique of time travel, which allows us on the one hand to remain in the so-called normal time despite high speeds, but on the other hand also to travel into the past and future. Concerning Earth, the present on Earth's surface, according to earthly time determination, lasts exactly 2.67778 seconds and is placed between the past and the future, whereby this present time is to be calculated according to the period of time during which the human brain is normally able to bring about a conscious concentration with regard to a matter. However, this concentration build-up time changes, depending on the mental development of Earth humans, as well as the amount of time changes depending on the invasion of world space material on Earth, whereby Earth also changes its gravitational strength over time. The collision with meteorites and fine space material makes Earth heavier every year by thousands of tons. So in this way, Earth increases in mass every year, whereby by far the largest part of it is dust fine and too small to burn up with corresponding speed in the atmosphere. Consequently, the fine particles sink slowly to Earth and cannot be observed, just like shooting stars and bigger or big meteorites. What has just been read corresponds to the literal recording of the conversation, as my father explained to you your question regarding present, past, time, and future.
Thanks, it will refresh my knowledge. But what I would like to ask, back in 1947, your father spoke of dark giant formations and dark giant formations, which I must understand as black holes today.
That's right, of course.
As far as I know, black hole is a term that attracted the attention of Earth's people about 50 years ago. Anyway, I may remember that I first heard or read this term around 1970.
This is indeed the case because in 1967 a man named John Archibald Wheeler made this term black hole publicly known, but it is not due to his idea as its origin. It must also be said that since then in astronomy research for black holes, many expressions have been coined and circulated. Although the term black hole appeared in modern times for the first time in 1964 in a report by science journalist Ann Ewing, in relation to a symposium of the American Association for the Advancement of Science on the various final stages of stars. The author cited a Hongyi Chiu as the organizer, as did an Alastair Cameron, Charles Meisner, Volker Weidemann, and John Beverly O'Kay, who appeared as speakers, but the actual originator of the term black hole was not openly mentioned, hence the name of the inventor of the term is unclear. The phenomenon of black holes has been known since 1783, but as dark stars, by a British naturalist named John Michell, who speculated on such dark stars and assumed that their gravitation must be so powerful that they were able to trap the light. He assumed that in the outer space of dark stars, sufficiently compact mass or energy accumulations form around their space area, into which matter as well as visible light are only torn, but cannot get out again.
Your father Svath said, I remember that. And you read that to me, that as a rule around black holes, there is radiant light, namely from suns and planets, etc., which are attracted and begin to shine brightly up. So be it with our galactic central sun.
That's right. And light that gets close to a black hole or other massive object is deflected and bundled, making it much brighter than before. A black hole itself looks like a lens. And it has to be said that apart from the actual black holes, which are visible through their activity in the form of the radiating outer image, there are also visible stars or suns which circle around an invisible black hole, which repeatedly tears away matter from the star and sucks it into the black hole. This causes the solar structure to heat up, also because it is approaching the black hole more and more and emits X-rays. Eventually, it is devoured by the black hole.
I am aware of this, and I also know that our astronomy scientists call the resulting radiation the death cry of matter.
I'm familiar with that.
Good, and thanks for the teaching. Here I have prepared something from the internet on the question of the Chinese population with regard to the probability calculation of the possible population that would have come about if the one-child marriage policy had not been introduced. Although the Fourth Plenary Assembly of the Central Committee of the Communist Party has just decided that China should apply the principle of the rule of law and equality before the law, it has also been said that a law of two-child politics should now be introduced, but nothing has changed so far. On the internet you can read that to date there are about 300 million people who have been illegally brought into the world. The parents of these illegally born children, who become adolescents and adults, must suffer all their lives, because their illegal children depend on them all their lives. Also on the internet I found the following under the sources: Courier International Liberation, China Information's World Data Bank, regarding the population of China, which of course is only listed according to earthly calculations and certainly does not correspond to the effectively correct numbers. If I consider that your figures regarding earthly population were always higher than those produced by earthlings. Look here, it's from the internet.
The history of one-child politics in China.
Jiwashingyu Zhengxie, Family Planning Policy, 1950. After the foundation of the People's Republic of China, Mao Zedong called on women to have as many children in the world as possible. Women with more than 10 children were honored as Honorable Mother. As a result of this policy, the Chinese people grew by a good 60% from 550 million in 1950 to 890 million in 1973 within just 20 years. 1979. In the face of this population explosion, the reformer after Mao, Deng Xiaoping, went into reverse and turned the new one-child policy formulated before his reign into a law. In addition, there was a new directive, according to which marriage was only permitted for men from the age of 22 and for women from the age of 20. 1982. China grows to over 1 billion people. 1984. First modification of the one-child rule. In the country, parents whose first child is a daughter may have a second child as soon as the first child is 5 years old. A few years later, in some regions, married couples who were themselves two single children are allowed to have 2 children. 1995. The government declares that family planning must be subordinated to the central task of economic development. The drastic reduction in the number of children should allow the limited resources of the state to be fully put at the service of economic development. This is the credo of the reforms at that time. 2002. Parents can buy the legal birth of a second child by paying a fee of 510 euros, equivalent to 5,000 yuan for an average urban monthly income of 1,200 yuan. In the case of illegal births, the penalty catalog provides for fines and the refusal of the entry of the birth in the so-called hukou, the family register. This means that the illegal second-born child lacks proof of identity, is therefore not allowed to go to school, is not entitled to free transportation, and will never be allowed to apply for an identity card. 2012. While the government proudly announces that it has prevented more than 300 million births since 1979, the case of the young Feng Jianmei makes headlines. 5 employees of the Family Planning Authority in Shanxi Province kidnap the pregnant woman and force her to abort her child in the 7th month because she refuses to pay the equivalent of 4,900 euros fine for this second child. The scandal provokes a storm of indignation as her husband puts photos on the internet of the young mother lying on her bed with her aborted dead child. The authorities then merely reminded that women in such a situation should be persuaded by the officials to abort. Forced abortion is an illegal act. To calm the storm of indignation, The government suspended 3 leaders of the Jinping region. This affair is, frankly speaking, only the tip of the iceberg. 55% of Chinese women have already had at least one abortion in their lives. Sterilization and forced abortions are part of everyday life in China, especially in Tibet. The ethnic minorities, about 10 million people, and mixed marriages do not actually have to follow the one-child rule, but the regional authorities decide on a case-by-case basis and often arbitrarily. 2013. Now a married couple can have 2 children if one of the partners was an only child. To date, this has been an experimental rule introduced in some regions, so to speak, which is now applied to the whole country. The population of marriageable age has shrunk by 3,450,000 people. In China, in 2013, about 200 million people, 60 years and older, lived. Until 2035, there will be 400 million. That would be not only like today, 14%, but then 25% of the whole people. China, an aging people who will lack young people capable of work, with dramatic consequences for the economy and also for the well-being of the elderly. An expert on the homepage of Renmin Wang estimates that the reform of the one-child policy could lead to the Chinese people growing by 1 million a year from 2015 onwards. According to estimates by the State Office for Birth Control, 15 to 20 million married couples support the reform of the strict one-child policy, and 50 to 60% of married couples wish to have a second child. Only for the nomenclatura and the people with good connections to the very top floors of the party do the rules apparently not apply. Director Zhang Yimu is supposed to be the father of at least 7 children. Theoretically, he would have to pay a fine of the equivalent of 19 to 20 million euros to the state based on his income. Such exceptions have long ceased to meet with the approval of the entire people. Sources: Courier International, Liberation, China Information's World Data Bank.
So these are the statements of Earth humans, which probably do not correspond to reality, but to pure assumptions or suppositions. But now the real question. Did you calculate the whole thing and did you come to a result?
What you say is correct, because the figures quoted in this internet excerpt do not correspond to reality, because they only correspond to estimates that are far from the effective values. We cannot rely on the Chinese population censuses because, as I have already said, they are often based on estimates and also on counterfeits. In this respect, we have carried out the most detailed investigations, as well as into the one-child policy and its consequences. And what we have done in our own interest with regard to extremely accurate probability calculations is to say that the data on the internet for an estimated 300 million fewer people born is also incorrect. The fact is that the Chinese regime introduced the one-child policy in 1979 to prevent the population from growing too fast because it wanted to ensure the supply of the people and at the same time conserve resources. Since then, according to our extremely precise calculations up to the 31st of December 2015, a number of 537,802,317 fewer people have been born in the past 37 years, according to the one-child policy. Without the strict measures of one-child family policy, more than 500 million more people would be living in China today. Our research includes all official births that would have been officially registered, as well as possible unofficial and unregistered births that would have taken place. So we have taken both possibilities into account in our calculations.
Even today, there are many officially unregistered people in China who were born during the 37 years of the one-child policy, who do not actually exist for the Chinese state and are practically without rights. This is because these people were conceived by parents who did not abide by the state decree and gave birth to more than one child. In China, these people are called Heihaizi, which means black children, and in a broader sense, born in secret. And these children, Adolescents and adults do not exist before the Chinese regime and its offices. In childhood, they were not allowed to go to school, and as teenagers and adults, they were not allowed to apply for a job. Of course, they were not allowed to open an account at a bank either. As second-born children in their families, they had to be kept hidden, and therefore could never get an identity card. If such black children were discovered by the police or state officials, the parents were severely punished because they had broken the law of one-child politics. Their fate was and is, at least still today, not to exist, because their parents conceived them despite the one-child policy and thus violated the law. And the irresponsible violation of the law has just brought with it the fact that millions of black children or black people live in China, which has also further fueled the overpopulation. In my opinion, the violation of the one-child law is really an unparalleled irresponsibility when the whole thing is considered in relation to the unstoppably growing overpopulation and the destruction of the climate, the nature and its fauna and flora and the possibility of human life, etc. resulting from this. So I find that drastic penalties are acceptable for parents who violate the law in this way. And this is also the case in China, because if they wanted or want to have their secretly newborn second child entered in the birth register, then they had or have to pay a penalty, usually so high that it far exceeded their income and they even suffered damage or even had to go to jail, etc. But nevertheless, many parents have not reported their children, which is why these Khazars have to live their lives in secret, and this number is very high, as you once told me in confidence.
That is correct, because according to our extremely precise scientific investigations, which we also carried out in this regard until the 31st of December 2015, there existed 15,716,006 Khazars up to then, who had to live in China up to then, and also still further a sad fate burdened to them by their irresponsible parents. Of course, it is not only in China, but also in various other countries and in certain organizations, that this cannot be discussed openly. Not even today, because a change to a two-child policy is to be introduced, which, if too much knowledge is available, could be harmful to the public and create uncertainty. So the Khazars still live in hiding, not only in villages in the countryside, but also in cities with over 1 million inhabitants, such as Beijing, etc., particularly in the remote regions of China. The authorities are particularly vigilant that no child is to be born too much, whereby nothing is sacred to them. As you sometimes tend to say, because the official henchmen penetrate into the private sphere and also deeply into the most intimate areas of the families without any objection, brutally and shamelessly. Such security guards and inspectors are not infrequently of a wicked disposition, know neither compassion nor decency, and are also corrupt and deceitful.
If I think how irresponsibly parents in China violate the law of one-child politics, then humanity still faces a lot of anger. Misery and misery, because the majority of Earthlings will also continue in the same framework, if in the distant future it is reasonable for a worldwide controlled birth control to be introduced. It will then probably be the case that this will be combined with drastic and blatant punishments with regard to offenses when finally the fact takes effect that the entire earthly life, that of mankind as well as nature and its fauna and flora, is inexorably destroyed and destroyed by the degenerated, criminal machinations of the overpopulation.
You speak of what will happen if the intellect and reason of Earthmen do not grasp and continue in the same framework as before.
Of course.
Then we should bring now our conversation briefly again on the following. It crossed my mind. Then I want to leave and come back at the beginning of the next month when I have a job to do with Enjana and Florena. Then I will begin.